The 6 wealth tiers of retirement. Which one are you in? Margaret worked for 31 years as a registered nurse in Ohio. She was not wealthy. She was not poor. She saved what she could, paid off her house at 62, and retired at 64 feeling like she had done everything right. She had just over $400,000 saved between her IRA and her 401k, a home worth about $200,000, and a Social Security check coming in every month. She thought she was in the middle of the pack, somewhere average. Turns out she was not. She was in the top half of all American retirees. Most people would find that hard to believe. But when you look at what the Federal Reserve's data actually shows about how wealth is distributed across retirees in this country, it becomes very clear that most Americans have a completely wrong picture of where they stand relative to everyone else.
And that wrong picture is costing them. It costs them in the decisions they make, the risks they take, the taxes they overpay, and the opportunities they miss. What you're about to read is going to walk you through 6 wealth tiers built directly from the Federal Reserve's 2022 Survey of Consumer Finances, which is the most recent comprehensive data on American household wealth available. You're going to see the net worth range for each tier, what income actually looks like at each level, what daily life feels like, and what the IRS takes from you at each point on the ladder. And at the end, you're going to see something the original data points toward, but almost nobody talks about. The difference between Tier 3 and Tier 5 is not always how much money you have. Sometimes it is entirely about how your money works for you. This information is for educational purposes only and is not tax or financial advice. Consult a qualified tax professional before making any decisions about your specific situation. Understanding the framework. Before we get into the tiers, one important framing note. The 6-tier structure being used here is a framework built on the Federal Reserve's percentile data. It is not an official Federal Reserve designation. What the Fed publishes is raw percentile data from its Survey of Consumer Finances. The tiers are a way to organize that data into something meaningful. The percentile cutoffs are real. The dollar ranges come directly from the data. The tier names are a framework for understanding what those numbers mean in real life. Tier 1. The bottom 25%. Net worth. Under $50,000. This is where the data gets uncomfortable. 25% of American retirees have a total net worth of under $50,000. That includes everything: the savings account, the car, the furniture, whatever small investment account might exist. Everything. Income at this level comes almost entirely from Social Security. In 2026, the average Social Security benefit before Medicare deductions is approximately $1,000 per month, or $2,312 per year. After the standard Medicare Part B premium of $185 per month, which is $2,020 per year, the net annual income is closer to $21,492. That is about $1,791 per month of actual money available to spend. In most American cities, that covers housing, utilities, food, and transportation. Nothing more. The people in this tier are not here because they were irresponsible. Many of them worked for decades in jobs that simply did not pay enough to save significantly. They were essential workers, caregivers, service workers, and tradespeople who kept other people's lives running, while not earning enough to build meaningful savings of their own. Some were knocked off track by a medical event, a divorce, a job loss, or a financial scam that wiped out years of slow, careful progress. The tax situation in Tier 1. The tax exposure at this level is actually low. Their income is generally below the combined income thresholds for Social Security taxation. And after the standard deduction for seniors, they often owe little or nothing in federal income tax. The problem is not taxes. The problem is that the margin between their income and their expenses is almost zero. Any unexpected cost, a car repair, a dental emergency, a week in the hospital, can tip them into crisis. Tier 2. The 25th to 50th percentile. Net worth between $50,000 and $400,000. This is where the data puts Margaret, and this is where most people who describe themselves as middle-class retirees actually live. At the midpoint of this tier, a retiree might have a home worth $150,000 with that much equity and another $100,000 in investable assets. Income here is still dominated by Social Security with a small supplement from savings. If they follow what financial planners commonly call the 4% withdrawal guideline, taking 4% per year from investable assets to preserve long-term portfolio health, $100,000 in savings produces $4,000 per year in additional income. Combined with Social Security, that brings total annual income to roughly $27,700, or about $2,308 per month. For a married couple with 2 Social Security checks, that number improves meaningfully. For a single retiree or a widow whose spouse has passed, $2,308 per month against average monthly expenses of $30,500 to $4,000 creates a monthly shortfall of $700 to $1,700. That gap usually gets filled by drawing down savings faster than intended, by part-time work, or by help from adult children. The tax situation in Tier 2. The tax situation here is worth paying close attention to. With a combined income above $25,000 for single filers, the IRS may begin taxing a portion of Social Security benefits as ordinary income. Every dollar pulled from a traditional IRA adds to adjusted gross income and pushes more of Social Security into taxable territory. A retiree in this tier, taking $18,000 from their IRA on top of $23,700 in Social Security, can find that their combined income reaches $50,550, pushing up to 85% of their Social Security into taxable income. That is money being sent to the IRS that, with different withdrawal sequencing and a basic understanding of how the combined income formula works, could stay in their pocket. The people in Tier 2 are often paying more in tax than they need to, simply because no one has explained how withdrawal order interacts with the Social Security taxation formula. Tier 3, the 50th to 75th percentile, net worth between $400,000 and $900,000. This is where retirement starts to feel like what most people imagined retirement would feel like. Someone in the middle of this tier, like a retired teacher with a small pension and $500,000 in a retirement portfolio, is bringing in Social Security of approximately $23,700 gross, plus pension income of perhaps $12,000 per year, plus 4% withdrawals on $500,000, which is $20,000 per year. Total income in that scenario approaches $50,700 annually, or about $4,742 per month. The basics are covered. There's room to eat out a few times a week. A vacation once a year is possible, but the anxiety does not disappear at this level. It shifts. Instead of worrying about whether the bills will be paid, Tier 3 retirees worry about the market. Their income depends on withdrawals from a portfolio and a sharp market drop in the early years of retirement. What planners call sequence of returns risk can permanently damage a portfolio they were counting on to last 25 or 30 years. The tax situation in Tier 3. The IRS is also a bigger presence at this level than most Tier 3 retirees anticipate. With $50,700 in annual income and Social Security included, combined income can push well above the $34,000 federal threshold for single filers, meaning up to 85% of Social Security is potentially taxable as ordinary income. At $55,700 in total income, after the standard deduction for a single filer in 2026 of $16,100, the taxable income of approximately $39,600 lands in the 12% federal bracket, but approaching the 22% bracket. The required minimum distributions that begin at age 73 then push that income higher every year. The effective tax burden at Tier 3 is consistently higher than retirees expect, not because of anything they did wrong, because no one sat down with them and showed them how the pieces interact. The sequence they take their money from their accounts, which state they live in, when they claim Social Security, whether they have done any Roth conversions during the low-income years between retirement and 73, every one of those decisions changes their total tax exposure by thousands of dollars per year. Tier 4, the 75th to 90th percentile, net worth between $900,000 and $2.2 million. This is the upper middle class of retirement, and it looks substantially different. Think engineers, senior managers, dual income professionals who maximize their savings for decades. Income at this level is more diversified. A high-earning retiree might have Social Security of $28,000 after Medicare, $1 million in investable assets producing $40,000 per year at the 4% rate, and possibly a pension or rental income layered on top. Total income at the midpoint of this tier can reach $65,000 to $80,000 per year. That is a comfortable retirement by almost any standard. International travel, second home discussions, helping grandchildren with college. But here's the thing the data reveals about Tier 4 that surprises almost everyone who reaches it. Most people at this level are still anxious. Studies have found that Americans believe they need $1.25 million to retire comfortably. And yet, even people who have crossed that threshold still feel like it might not be enough. The tax situation in Tier 4. The tax exposure at Tier 4 is significant and often poorly managed. Required minimum distributions beginning at age 73 force large taxable withdrawals from traditional accounts. At income levels above $106,000 for single filers or $212,000 for married couples, Medicare ERMA surcharges begin adding to the premium cost. The people in Tier 4 who do not plan their withdrawal sequence carefully are often the ones paying the most unnecessary tax in retirement. Tier 5, the 90th to 99th percentile, net worth between $2.2 million and $13.6 million. The income picture changes completely here. At this level, investable assets are large enough to throw off dividends, interest, or rental income without requiring the sale of any underlying assets. A retiree with $2 million in a diversified dividend portfolio yielding 3% to 4% annually receives $60,000 to $80,000 per year from their assets without selling a single share. Social Security becomes a supplement rather than a lifeline. The defining characteristic of Tier 5 is not what they spend. It is what they no longer have to worry about. A 30% market drop does not require them to change their spending. They are collecting income from assets rather than drawing down assets. The tax situation in Tier 5. The tax challenges at this level shift to a different kind of problem. IRMA surcharges, net investment income tax of 3.8% on investment income above $200,000 for single filers and $250,000 for joint filers, and estate planning. The people at Tier 5 who do not have a tax strategy are paying substantially more to the federal government than they need to. Tier 6. The top 1%, net worth. Above $13.6 million income here comes from everywhere simultaneously. Dividends, business interests, real estate portfolios, family trusts, private investments. Social Security is a rounding error at this level. The concerns at Tier 6 are almost entirely about legacy, tax efficiency, and generational wealth transfer. The estate tax exemption in 2026 is $13,099 million per individual. For couples, effective planning can shelter nearly $28 million from the federal estate tax. The people at this level are not worried about running out of money. They are worried about preserving it across generations. The pattern. Nobody explains. Now, here's what you need to take away from all of this, because this is the part that the original Federal Reserve data points toward, and that almost nobody explains plainly. When you look at the tiers side by side, a pattern appears. From Tier 1 through Tier 4, income comes from Social Security, pensions, and the sale of assets. You draw down the portfolio and watch the market to make sure it holds up. At Tier 5 and 6, income comes primarily from assets that produce cash flow. They are not selling. They are collecting. And here's the critical insight. That shift from selling assets to collecting income from assets is not something that only happens at $2.2 million. It can happen at $200,000. It can happen at $500,000. It is not about the dollar amount, it is about the structure. Margaret's transformation. When Margaret restructured a portion of her IRA into a dividend-producing fund, After working with a tax professional, she began receiving regular income from that portion of her portfolio without selling a share. When she used a bond ladder to generate predictable income at set intervals, she reduced the number of forced IRA withdrawals she was making and lowered the combined income that was pushing her Social Security into the taxable zone. She also did a partial Roth conversion in year 2 of her retirement when her income was at its lowest, moving $40,000 from her traditional IRA to her Roth at the 12% rate before her required minimum distributions began pushing her income back up. Her net worth did not change dramatically, her Social Security did not change, but her monthly income became more predictable, more stable, and meaningfully less taxed. She went from taking money out of the market to collecting income from the market. She did not jump from Tier 2 to Tier 5 in terms of what the Federal Reserve would assign her, but she began living with the financial stability and psychological ease of someone 2 tiers above her on paper. Her bills were covered without watching the market every week. Her tax exposure came down, and the anxiety that had followed her into retirement, the quiet weight of wondering whether the money would hold, slowly began to lift. What this means for you. The wealth tier you're in right now reflects what you have accumulated. It is not fixed in terms of lifestyle. What you have saved is what you have saved. But how that money works for you, how predictably it delivers income, how efficiently it avoids unnecessary taxation, how well it is structured against the forced distributions the IRS is going to require starting at age 73, that is entirely within your control. The retirees who understand this are not always the ones with the most money. They are the ones who have structured their money to work the way Tier 5 money works, regardless of the dollar amount. They have shifted from drawing down assets to collecting income from assets. They have minimized the taxes the IRS can take. They have reduced the number of financial decisions that depend on what the market does next week. And they sleep better because of it. Your next steps. If this showed you something about where you actually stand that you did not expect, share it with someone who needs to see it. If you are not sure which tier you are in, or if you are in Tier 2 or 3 and want to understand how to restructure your income to feel like Tier 4 or 5, that is exactly the kind of planning that saves tens of thousands of dollars over a 20-year retirement. Drop a comment below. Which tier are you in? And did the description of life at that tier match what you're actually experiencing? The most common situations help shape future content that protects retirees from the problems they didn't know existed until it was too late to fix them easily. Understanding where you stand is the first step. Understanding how to make your money work differently is the second. And that second step is where the real difference gets made.